Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today about the latest version of ClusterVisor, our cluster management software solution. My name is Wade. I'm a member of the marketing team here at Advanced Clustering Technologies. Thank you for joining us. And I have a few housekeeping items to cover before we begin the webinar. The first thing I wanted to let you all know is that everyone in this webinar is on mute. We are recording this webinar and we will be sharing the link for anyone who missed or who wants to revisit the webinar after the fact. So look for that in your email later today. And if you have questions that you want to share with us during this Zoom presentation, feel free to input those at any time and we will answer those time permitting following the presentation that you're about to see. I want to talk a little bit about availability and licensing of the new version of ClusterVisor. ClusterVisor 1.24.02 is available as of today as a complete cluster management software solution for our customers. And for the first time, due to demands of several people who've made the request, we are now going to allow it to be deployed on non-advanced clustering hardware as well for the first time. And there are two installation options. The first is the traditional installation mode, where you install it on the head or login node. And then there's our preferred method, which is that you use the dedicated ClusterVisor appliance, which then essentially turns ClusterVisor into a disaster recovery solution as well. Licensing of ClusterVisor is done based on the total quantity of nodes in the system involved and is available for terms of 1, 3, and 5-year licenses. An active license is required in order to get support or updates and the latest versions, but the software will continue to work even if your license expires. If you're interested in learning more about availability or licensing, please contact us at info@advancedclustering.com to discuss your implementation plan. And now I would like to introduce our company president and CTO, who will make the presentation, Kyle Sheumaker.
Thanks, Wade. So as Wade mentioned, this is going to be an introduction to the 1.24.02 version, as well as going over a pretty cool new feature called LogVisor. Again, thanks for attending. I know some of the people that are attending has kind of seen a sneak preview of this at Supercomputing. So there'll be a few updates for those that have seen that. So we'll get into it. I'm going to start with a little bit of background on how we're doing versioning numbers now so that everyone understands. So the first digit is the major version. So the second digit is the release year. The third digit is the month. And then the last hyphen, and there's usually a 4-digit build number. So what we're committed to doing is making the major versions being a simple kind of DNF update without any configuration changes and very limited to no breaking changes. So that's why this is still a 1 release, because this is something that can be installed and updated on existing systems very easily. And so this is obviously 2024 now, and it's the February, so that's why it's the 1.24.02 release. So as Wade mentioned, ClusterVisor is a complete management system for an HPC cluster, allows you to deploy, provision, manage, monitor, and maintain the system. So we're not going to go into every feature. We have another webinar that goes into kind of some of the things that it can do. And if you're not familiar with ClusterVisor already, feel free to reach out and we can go into a full, more in-depth of everything. Again, this is really focusing on what's new in this release. So speaking of what's new, this is what we'll be covering in this webinar. So there's a completely redesigned web UI. We have role-based access control. We have some new end-user facing components. Monitoring and alerts have been enhanced. As I mentioned earlier, our LogVisor AI product, some upgrade tools, and lots of changes and bug fixes. And this is the biggest upgrade that we've had so far to ClusterVisor. There's been over 800 code commits and nearly 50,000 lines of code change. So even though it's not a new major version number, it is pretty major as a release. So that's why we wanted to do this webinar. So what we're going to do during the webinar is do a series of a few slides, but a lot more interactive stuff. So I'll be flipping back and forth between the slides and logging into the system so you can really see everything. So So the new web UI, so we completely reimagined the UI from the old version. So we still use Cockpit as kind of our UI, but instead of being a plugin like before, we're kind of replacing the entire thing. So this allows us a lot more control over the user interface, makes it a lot cleaner and a lot easier to understand of what is ClusterVisor doing with what versus what Cockpit was doing. So the other major thing we did is really moving the configuration and data into logical sections. Before, there was one generic config section that had everything, and you had to jump back and forth between a whole bunch of different pages. So obviously that was not ideal. So that has been completely changed. So I'm gonna flip over there. And now during the, from this point forward, I think I'm gonna shut the video off just so I can concentrate on giving the demo. So, and now we're gonna flip over to the login page. So for those that haven't seen this before, this is what the ClusterVisor login page looks like. Again, it's built around the Cockpit project. It's an open source project to handle kind of web applications. So I'm going to go ahead and log in as a ClusterVisor admin. So you can see, for those that haven't seen it before, UI is pretty different, and that we have a lot more control here. So a couple things I want to point out is there's some status indicators at the top about whether you're connected to ClusterVisor, because the web UI does work even when the ClusterVisor server process is not running. You can actually restart it, manage it through the web UI even still. Whether you have full admin provisions as part of ClusterVisor. This is an indicator if you have changes that need to be committed to nodes. We batch changes in ClusterVisor so that if you're making a bunch of changes to nodes like IP addresses, things like that, you can decide when to actually apply them. And this will light up when you have changes that are available to commit. This is a notification area. We'll get to that in a few minutes. Then there is a user kind of thing here. So there is a change password and manage SSH keys. So change password would be changing your local Unix password on the machine, and managing SSH key will actually manage your public keys and your authorized keys for you. So you as an admin, though, have the ability to disable these features. So if you're using an external LDAP or some other authentication source, you don't want people changing passwords this way, you can turn that off. If you're doing SSH keys in a different way, you can turn that off as well. So on the left-hand side here, we have our main menu. So this menu dynamically changes based on the permissions you have inside of ClusterVisor. My admin user that I just logged in has full access to everything, so you can kind of see what that looks like. So there's a search tool, so you can easily find the thing you want to edit. And everything is kind of grouped based on different categories of things you might want to do. So we're going to start with the dashboard. For those that are familiar with ClusterVisor, this is largely unchanged. There's a few minor updates into the dashboard and some bug fixes, but the gist is the same. These are completely editable dashboards. You can create as many dashboards as you'd like. You can edit them. It's a full kind of GUI-based editing tool, so you can edit which stats you want to show. You can rearrange things. You can show things by tables, groups, charts, all kinds of different options. One of the things I wanted to highlight in this version, we added this in a slightly previous version, but it's still a relatively new feature, is that we can now support collecting data from other devices that are not just nodes. So in this example here, this is pulling from our data center UPS here, as well as some in-row air conditioners that we have. So you can actually get a full kind of, not just the nodes in your cluster, a full aggregate look at the whole environment as well. And because these are stats pulled into ClusterVisor, you get to be able to log against them, you can graph them, and you can create alerts and rules based on them. So you can alert when temperatures are too high or it's on battery power from your UPS. So you don't need extra software for that kind of thing. So that's kind of a nice feature. We do only support a limited number of hardware at this point. It is SNMP based, so it is adaptable to different hardware. So make sure you contact us if you have questions if your hardware would be supported for that. So nodes and devices is probably one of the areas that got the most update as far as configuration or UI changes here. So if we click on nodes and devices here and click on nodes, this is all the nodes as part of our cluster. So this is where you can before there was a nodes and devices section or device details section where you could just look at data about the nodes. Now here is one unified place where you can look at data and make updates and changes all in one place. So we have this card view that's by default. Will show you all of the nodes in your system, because you could potentially have a lot of nodes, and that you want to manage your head node most frequently or another node. We do allow this favoriting option. So if I go down here, I want to put the appliance as a favorite as well. So they'll pop up at the top, so you can always find the node you're looking for. So the other thing that we still do, even though it doesn't look like it in this default view, we're reviewing each node as an individual card, but we still allow configuration and do configuration by groups of nodes. So whenever you want to look at that, you can hit this tab or this button, and it will group things based on the configuration entry. So node 3 through 8 here is created automatically in one configuration section. So editing 3 through 8 is editing one item instead of editing each one individually, and it automatically will generate this list of nodes. And if we wanted to make this bigger, we can resize this to be 3 through 10, and all of a sudden there's 10 nodes in our cluster configuration. As you look though, you can say, well, that's weird. It's 3 through 8, but it's showing 4 through 8. Well, if we turn on this, we have the ability now to permanently inactivate nodes. So we found this, especially when clusters age and get to 4, 5, 6, 7 years of lifetime, maybe a node is dead. And so before, it was a real pain to figure out how to remove a node in the middle of a range. So this doesn't have to be in the beginning like this, but you can permanently inactivate nodes. It will remove them from the UI, so you don't have to worry about it, and you don't have to make massive configuration changes to a possibly old cluster. So there's a couple other nice things here. These are these checkboxes where you can do global things. So you can do global power control, some console related things if I check multiple machines. So, but when we look at each individual card, you can choose which stats to show. So for example, here on this one, we've got CPU usage and memory used. This one, we added a disk usage percent. All of the stats that are part of ClusterVisor can be showed on this card view. So you can easily get at a glance kind of view of what's going on. And then there's 4 buttons that are on each individual device here. The first one is if there are any alerts. So you can see most of these are grayed out, which means there are no alerts. So right now, ClusterVisor doesn't see that there are any problems on these nodes. So that's why they're grayed out. This one that's red, you can see there's 2 alerts here. We'll go into the alerts a little bit more in detail, but you can see which monitoring rules have failed on these nodes. The next button is a power control button. So if you click here, it will actually connect over SSH in the background and see, am I able to SSH to that node? If I am, then it will say working, and then I can choose to reboot or shut down. And it will actually SSH to that node and reboot or shut it down. So the next down here is the IPMI state. So this will reach out to the BMC on the node and actually be able to power on, off, power cycle, soft off, soft reset, kind of your default IPMI level control there. So a quick, easy way that if you need to reboot a node, you click in here, do it, power node on, off. And then, as I said before, if I wanted to do multiple nodes, I can do this, click the power control, the 2 devices I selected, and you can do kind of group level power controls instead of just single one-off node at a time. The next button is the console feature. So we have the ability to do multiple consoles through the web browser as well. So if I go here and choose CLI terminal, it'll open an SSH session as my user to that node. You can see it's a fully interactive console that you can do whatever you would normally want to do from a management perspective. So we also offer a couple of other unique things like the GUI desktop version, which will spawn a VNC session on that machine and then deliver it back to your web browser. So this is a full kind of X11 session. So if you have an app that's much easier to configure or test via GUI, you have the full ability to do so. So you have the full kind of GNOME desktop or whatever desktop environment you have running on those nodes. Let's see here, we'll log out of that. So one of the other things we added is IPMI level control. So one of the challenges we've had and customers have brought to us is sometimes a node's not functioning correctly, or there's a feature in the IPMI interface, the web interface of the IPMI, that isn't really accessible via the command line. But on a normal cluster configuration, that IPMI interface is behind a head node and a private network that isn't terribly easy to access from your desktop. So there is, you can do SSH port forwarding and all kinds of things like that. But, sometimes that's not the easiest to set up. So what we offer is the ability on a node by node basis, you can turn this on or off to be able to pull up the that information. So all you have to do is click IPMI web interface, and this will spawn a web browser on the appliance or the head node of wherever ClusterVisor is running, and allow you to pull up that kind of web page. So if I click here, so I can now log into the BMC on the node. So, and this is tunneled through the appliance or ClusterVisor head node, still on the private network, but it's running, and so you can easily access it. I'll go ahead and close that. So that's kind of the gist of this main view here as far as these buttons go, except for the last one, which is the editing button. So if you click here, you have all of the controls to edit a node, delete a node, rename it, whatever you need to do. So if we look at this node, it's defined by itself. If we go down here, you can see it's a unit all on its own, the head node, because it has different configuration. Here you see we have these regular nodes. If we click on the edit button, we can see if we're editing, we're actually going to be editing this whole range of nodes. So if we choose edit on there, we get a completely revamped editing UI as well. So, and that it has a set of default sections here, which are all kind of the always included configuration options, and then we have a series of plugin options here. So the plugin options are, you can turn on and off. So the plugins basically are the action or the code that makes changes to nodes. So for example, we have a time server plugin where we say where we want to get time and how to sync it. So we have a somewhat limited set of options here to manage the time server. So if that works for most users, but if you have a very complicated time server setup, you would be able to turn this plugin on, off, and manage that yourself. So the idea here is that it's completely configurable. So you can choose how much you want ClusterVisor to do versus how much you are going to manage manually. So a couple of things, though, as I mentioned, this is one configuration for all 8 nodes of the cluster, but that doesn't mean that there can't be different values for different nodes. And that's what we call variance. So you can see here that most of the fields have 0 variance. So that means that the SSH key is the same, or the rack units is the same, but you go down here to something like serial number, there are 6 different variants, because all of the machines aren't going to have the same serial number. You can click on the variants and you see you can override individual fields on a field by field basis. So you can see that we have different serial numbers for all of our 8 individual nodes. So it still allows you to create one configuration entry that, maybe 90% of the values are the same, but there might be 1 or 2 values that are slightly different. So you can easily do that. And so this is how we set one of the nodes is permanently inactive. You can see here that the default is active, that all the nodes are active, except for SPR03 is set as permanently inactive. So I think that's kind of the main highlight here. There has been a lot of changes to the editing UI. There were some bugs and some weirdnesses in the UI and previous versions. We think we've captured and that feedback from everyone and hopefully fixed all of them. So I'm not going to save any changes and cancel that. So along with all of these things under node, you have the same kind of section under the other kind of main configuration entries of the devices in your cluster. So we have chassis. So in this scenario, we don't have any chassis, but if you had a multi-node system like a 2U4 node or blade system, you can define chassis that are basically containers to hold nodes. We can have switches. Again, we have a switch here, and again, using our SNMP integration, we can actually pull the CPU utilization and the temperature values from the switch. We have devices, so I'm going to flip to this kind of view to show them in a little more compact way. You can see all of the individual devices, and devices are basically any other generic kind of item on the cluster. So you can actually add in, like I said, we've got UPSs, we've got air conditioners. You can create groups. One of the neat things is that we allow you to do aggregating stats by group. So, so this group contains all of our nodes. This group contains all of our GPUs, and we're able to aggregate values like the total free memory or the total power consumption of that whole group of nodes. So instead of seeing it on an individual basis, you can do this now and aggregate. You can create as many arbitrary groups as you want, and nodes can be in different groups. So you can, and a node can be in multiple groups even. So you can have kind of, segment your system however that makes sense. So we do a set of default group stats, but you can actually go through here and build your own group stats as well. There's a full UI to edit that and be able to build kind of complicated stats. So, so, so we also have stat history, allows you to go through and view kind of all of the stats on the system. You can browse an individual stat. You can search for a type of stat you want, whichever node. You can choose to graph it, etc. Rack layout is a rack diagramming tool. So for those that haven't seen it before, it's a full drag and drop kind of rack diagrammer. You can add as many racks as you want. When you add a rack, you can say how many U it is, how many 0U spaces for PDUs, which row and column it is in your data center. So you can actually build out kind of a full representation of that. And if I need to move GPU 4 up here to a different spot in the rack, it's as simple as just point and clicking. So you can easily build kind of a rack diagram like that. And it's not just for looks, we can use it in other places. One of the things that's kind of convenient here is by default, it will put a little red dot if there are any monitoring rules on the node. So again, we saw that when looking at nodes that SPR1 had some monitoring rules attached to it. So you see the little red dot there. But where the rack diagrams become kind of really useful is if you go back to the dashboard, you can choose to add rack diagrams to the dashboard and actually create heat maps based on any individual stat. So this first column, we have CPU usage percentage. And then here we have the inlet temperature. And so you can actually create a heat map and actually starting to see things physically, so as well as part of your cluster. So, job scheduler, we fully integrate with SLURM, so you can look at the status of the queues, jobs running, which nodes they're running on, if they're active, if they're drained, all of that kind of stuff. You can look at history and details from there. There has been a lot of changes in this version. To the scheduler stuff. We'll go over the monitoring alerts in a bit. Images and booting is our full ability to manage what OS is running on systems and the cloner type images, so the image that gets deployed. So so you can manage the images, you can edit the images through here, you can delete them, you can get a terminal inside the image. We can do stateless images, which are meant for nodes without disks. Disk layouts is kind of changed in this version from the UI perspective. It's a lot easier to edit. So if you look here, you can now go in and set, here's all the disks that are going to be part of the systems. Here's the software RAIDs and their setup. And here's the LVMs if there were any, and where the bootloaders are going to be installed in the file systems. So the UI is really refined a lot and making this these kind of editings significantly easier than before. Users, groups, and roles. So if you use ClusterVisor, has a couple of different options. So you can do internal LDAP. So if you don't have an external authentication source, we provide one. If you do, you can click here on users. You can see all the users. You can edit them, delete them, all kind of regular user management stuff, as well as groups. If you have an external LDAP, if you're authenticating externally, you can disable this. We can coexist with internal, using an internal LDAP and your external LDAP. That's all configuration in your LDAP. So if you have internal LDAP, if you have external, you can define multiple different LDAP setups. Roles, we'll get into in a bit. And I think the rest of it, there's a couple of things here I wanted to show. Cluster configuration was there before. Cluster UI configuration, this is where you can turn on and off whether you want them to be able to change their password or manage their SSH keys. You can also give a name to the cluster as a whole that will show up. So there's also a daemon status tool now, which will reach out to every node in your cluster and make sure that everything that ClusterVisor needs to run is actually running and what the state is. So all of those kinds of things will show up here, and you can actually, if you wanted to stop a service, you can actually do that directly from the web UI. License info, just a quick way to see what you're licensed for and what features you have. If you ever want to get back to the regular cockpit interface because you're still using it for some other reasons, you can click there and it'll take you right back to that. And then links is a customizable thing where you can put arbitrary other links. So if we go back to the ClusterVisor UI configuration under menu links, you can add all your own individual links here. So if you had a ticketing system or a wiki that you wanted to point people to, it could all be there. So I think that's the main highlights I want to talk about on the UI. So I'm going to flip back here, but I do see we have a couple of questions that have come in. So I'll see if I can answer those. There's a question here of the maximum number of nodes supported. There is no technical limit on ClusterVisor of the number of nodes that can be supported. It's all more about licenses. So you can, we've tested up to a couple of thousand as a test case and not run into any performance issues. So it all a little bit depends on the hardware you're running it on and that kind of thing. But for most size systems, shouldn't be an issue. And then there is a question on, can I upgrade in place from 1.23? Yes, you can. We'll get into that. I do have a couple slides specifically about that. And then another question about let me say I marked these as that I've answered them. Can the VNC and CLI interfaces run a SLURM job? I'm thinking of user facing them. Yes, you can start a SLURM job with them. They do not run inside of SLURM yet. That is something that we're investigating, like being able to spawn a SLURM job that actually gives users back a GUI or a command line. But so that is not here. But if you want to give the users a terminal like on your login node and allow them to run, SBatch or something like that, 100% you can do that now. So I got another question about how the old plugins map to the new UI, say what was enabled, disabled. Okay, I did not highlight that explicitly, but if you go into the edit, there's now plugins are still here. So the UI has changed on the plugins. It's a lot more information about what they do, but you can see which plugins are enabled or disabled. So you can easily check on and off the plugins you'd like. And then, got another question here about, can we bind ClusterVisor to an AD domain and then use role-based access control? Absolutely. So we'll get into that in a bit on when we get to the role-based access control, but we definitely built that in mind. All right, I'm going to move on to the next section because we'll run out of time if I don't. So the next section is about role-based access control. So the idea here is to enable or disable specific web UI features to specific set of users. As asked, it does work with internal or external LDAP for users and groups. Along with role-based access control that enables end user components. Previous versions of ClusterVisors were really focused almost exclusively around admin only kind of UIs, but now that we have this role-based access control, it allows a lot more options. So one thing is the consoles. It was previously asked. There was also a question about, or there is also a file manager that's built in, and we have some ideas of how this is going to expand in the future, but I'll give you kind of a quick rundown of what the role-based access control looks like. So if I flip back over here to our role-based, so under users, groups, and roles, we have users, groups, and roles. So the reason it is roles and not just part of a group or something like that is so that we can use that external LDAP. So if you have an AD domain you're binding to, that the roles still work, and you don't need specific groups or users created on your cluster or on your AD domain. So you can define as many roles as you want. So see, we have two different roles. Cluster admins is kind of a default role that will show up on your system. So anyone that's in the cluster admin role will have full access to ClusterVisor and have administrator level privileges. So obviously you want to limit that. But when you go to edit a role, you can see you can turn on whether and off whether this role has full based access. There's permissions. If you have full control, you don't need to enable any specific permissions because you just have all of them. But if we go into groups, you can see any Unix user group that is part of this role. So if you're using our LDAP, you can hit the lookup button, you can browse your groups, click, point, add them to a group. If not, you can type any group name in here. And if the group name resolves, great. And then that user will then be in this role. Same with users. So you can add individual users by the lookup button, or you can type the username in. So that way you'll have to type names in if you're using AD instead of using ours, but or internal LDAP, but it's still fully accessible either way. So if we want to look at a particular role here, we have this role called users. We edit that. So we can see that there is a very limited set of sections here we have. So, and we can see that we have a group cluster user. So all of the members of the cluster users will be in this role. Along with role-based access control of just menu items, there are individual things you can offer role-based access control to. So we talked about the dashboards and being able to create multiple dashboards. When you edit a dashboard, there is now an access by role here at the top. So you can choose which roles have access to which dashboard. So if you wanted a very generic dashboard that had some information, but not give you details on node status or alerts or the data center environment, you can make a different dashboard for your admins and a different dashboard for your users. The other thing we can do with that is, with the role-based access control, is on a node by node basis, when you edit a node under console, you can go in and choose which roles have access to SSH to the node via the web UI, or which roles have access to pull up a VNC console on the node. Here you can see that the user's role is here for the head node, but if I go and look at my compute node and look at that console setting, that the users are not in the selected role for SSH or VNC access. So what I'm going to do now is log out as an admin and log in as an individual user. I guess I got to type a password, right? So you can see the URL is the same, but if we pull up the main URL here, so you can see I have a very limited list of things on the side. So I can get to the dashboard, the rack layout, a couple of other things. You can see all of the edit buttons are gone. I can't view any other dashboard. I can view the rack layout, but again, can't edit it. Console terminal, I only have the head node. So, and I can pull up the command line and the GUI, but I can't pull up the IPMI or any of the other things. File manager, again, is role controlled. So you can define as an administrator which directories and paths they have access to on which hosts. So for example, if I click here, this is where you'd be able to change. You can say I only have access to one directory. But while I'm here, I'm going to go over kind of a little bit. The file manager, the idea behind creating this was for more novice users that are not that good with the command line to being able to upload and download files. So you now have that ability. So there's an upload button. You can drag and drop files from your web browser, hit the upload, it'll upload the file there. So you can download files, you can change permissions, kind of a, basic file management stuff. So from an end user perspective, it might be helpful for some users. So the links also show up here. So again, this is where links start to become useful. If you wanted to link to external documentation or like I said, a help desk, a ticket system you had, so you can customize that menu and put as many links to other sources as you want there. So that's kind of the main overview of the role-based access control. I see there's a couple of questions that came in. So can users see their memory use for their SLURM job? Yes, by default, the SLURM information is available to users, so they can see that. So I got a question here of, can you show a list of your Linux distros? So currently we support EL distros, so we can do Red Hat, Rocky, Alma, and we are supporting the 8 series and the 9 series. So you can choose, and you can even mix and match. So so that you'll be able to have some nodes as one distro and some nodes as another, even different versions. I noticed the laser version via update is 120. When can I see 1.24.x? I'll get into that, but it will be later today. So for a new one. And then do you have a separate recorded webinar for ClusterVisor for new users? We have a webinar we've done a while ago, but we do not have a new one yet that is incorporating all the new UI and new features, but that is on the to-do list. Okay, so I already did that kind of demo. So alerts and notifications. So we made a few minor refinements to the alert system. The big one is history of actions on alerts and silencing options. So I'll just kind of get into that. So if we go back over here to monitoring alerts, under monitoring alerts is where you can set up all of the alert options. So you can have active rules, you can see the history of all the rules, the details, you can edit your rules through this UI. But one of the big things is looking at, oh, that's interesting, live demo, right? So the alerts here, you can start to see the alerts that are active. So and I have this test rule here, just so we had something in here. You can see the rule, and you can see this rule has been a long ongoing rule and been active for a long time. But what I really want to show here is there's now a log that goes along with the rule, or the alert. So you can see which users which of your admins, if you have multiple admins, of the reason they were silenced or acknowledged and cleared. So you can kind of see that full history of when it happened and giving a reason. So the other thing that we do is now silence. Before we just had an acknowledge, and what happened when you acknowledged the rule went away forever. And that isn't necessarily probably what we want, because rules will automatically clear themselves when they're no longer true. So with the silence button, it allows you to set a time period for silencing. So if I silence this rule, I can choose to silencing it for an hour, 4 hours, 8 hours, or custom date and time. The idea behind this is, a lot of the times you might find that there's a problem with a node, but you're going to have a maintenance window in a week. So you know what, I'm cool with silencing it until that maintenance window's over. So that way you could go in and put that in there. You'll stop getting notifications about the rule, or the rule being true, and that you can then make sure you actually proactively go out and fix it. So that is kind of the main thing. The rules also now have, so you can edit the rule. There's a full-blown rule-based editor where you can actually add fields, values, test them, all of that kind of stuff. There's actions available. The actions can be emailing or actually running commands on the system. We do have some kind of, if you add a monitoring rules, we have some templates for things that you can add, like if your InfiniBand is down, so you can kind of pre-build rules, and you can choose which nodes and how often and what the different email actions are on those individual rules. So the next feature I want to talk about is our LogVisor AI, which is a project we've been working on for a while, and honestly was built originally internally for us to help from a support standpoint, but we figured this would be really helpful for a lot of people. And it is an AI model built around syslog data. So the idea here is your ClusterVisor server is a syslog sync for all the rest of your nodes. So when you set this up, your ClusterVisor appliance or server head node starts running this AI model and will classify log entries as they come in real time. And by classify, the idea here is to pick out the log entries that are actually problematic. Because if you look at a cluster of even a small number of nodes, it's hundreds of thousands of syslog entries a day, where 99% of them are not that important, but there are a few that might be. And most people don't look through them. And so the idea here is we're trying to automatically find those and elevate those to a level where you see it and know I should do something about it. When that happens, we can automatically create ClusterVisor alerts. So that way there is a full kind of actionable thing that will happen when bad things are detected by the AI model. So there's also a full training loop built in, so the model can be improved over time. The idea here is we've trained it on a bunch of data. It's not perfect, but There is a way for you, when something is misclassified, whether we classify it as a critical alert and it's not, or something that we didn't classify as a critical alert that is critical, you actually have the ability to go through and do that, send it to us, and we will retrain the model. So all of the training was handled by us, so you don't need to worry about any of that. So we'll take all of those feedback from customers of running ClusterVisor that are able to send us log data that we can then train on. So a little bit about the model. It's composed of approximately 680,000 parameters, 150 tokens, 4,000 unique words. It was trained on over 500,000 log entries that we got from support tickets from customers over the years. So this is not a chat GPT or anything like that. It's, you know, orders of magnitude smaller. But the point is, it's only for one purpose. The model is for analyzing log data. So it will get bigger over time. We'll get more features. This is kind of the first release of it. So we're excited to see what the feedback is and getting data and really be able to refine this model. So let's see. So a little bit of statistics here. So we are inferring on CPU, doesn't require any GPU hardware. So on our appliance is kind of our test scenario here, that it can handle over 2,000 log entries per second without really breaking much of a sweat on the appliance. So you can see kind of some of the statistics there. So the idea here is to make it as kind of least stressful as possible on a machine, but still giving you some useful data out of it. So on large scale systems, there might be some extra hardware requirements or adding a lower end GPU to speed up inference, but you're gonna have to get pretty big, I think, before that starts to be a huge problem. So we'll give you a little demo of what this actually looks like in practice. So I'm going to just do the web-based demo, but there is a full command line for this as well. Everything in ClusterVisor, nearly everything in ClusterVisor has a command line component as well. So that if that's something you're interested in, want to see more of that, let us know. So under LogVisor, there's a couple of things. There's settings. This is how you set up LogVisor, where you can set up, you know, what happens when critical alerts happens, what actions happen, what happens when error alerts. You can set different parameters about those. But under view search logs here, one of the things you gain with running LogVisor is that we now have a fully indexed version of syslog across your entire cluster. So not only are you gaining the AI model part, you're also gaining easy inspection and searching and querying ability of your log data. So we do not remove the syslog data that's already there. The log files are still written. You can actually choose that. There's a setting in the plugin when you enable LogVisor to still log locally or not. But if you don't want to, you can. If you still do, absolutely can. Currently, we store 30 days of log data in LogVisor, but that is a configurable option. You can go and change if you would prefer to store less or more. So we don't have an unlimited amount of disk space, so that's why we're keeping them for a short period of time. But you can see here, you get a date and time search. You can see this is the AI label. So these are the labels we have, whether neutral, warning, error, or critical. You can see which hosts are logging data, so you can search for just an individual host. You can look at processes or even individual PIDs. And this is also a full text Boolean searching. So you can do looking for this word and not this word. So you can easily really search through the logs a lot quicker than using grep or something like that if you had otherwise. So here you see all the individual log entries. You can see we have the AI label, the date and time it came in, the host, the process, and the message. So if we wanted to view only critical alerts, we can click critical here. So right now we have kind of a fake process to generate something that we know MCE log uncorrected error produces a critical alert. So we're running that in the background as just through a command line thing just to inject it in the log, because these machines don't actually have problems, but you can see what that looks like. So they become critical alerts. They all get marked as critical. So, but let's go back to not looking at just critical alerts and looking at this. Let's say, you know what, we think this particular log entry is important to us. So that's what we have, this idea of a revision filter. And this is feedback we got at Supercomputing, where some customers said, you know, will this detect some security problems or be able to detect when people are logging in with a password instead of an SSH key? And the answer is, by default, the AI model would not do that because there's one model for everyone. So the answer we came up with this is then being able to add these revision filters. So what we can do is you can click Add Revision Filter, click a line item, create a filter, and then, so you have two options when adding revision filters. It's creating a filter or send to act. Send to act is part of that, what I talked about as the training loop scenario, where you would want to send it to us because we mislabeled it. And so you can go and say, that's not a neutral, that's actually an error. And so you can do that. But there's also the idea of a revision filter. And with a revision filter, you can create a substring or a regex and actually turn things that are unique to your environment into critical or warning alerts that will automatically get elevated. So we don't have to have a specific plugin or stat to monitor. You can now do kind of regexes across your log data or searching substrings across your log data to turn them into alerts. So it's an easy way to kind of get more features, more alerting built around your environment as part of ClusterVisor. But let's say we didn't want to do this and we just wanted to say, you know, this is an actual error. You can do that. You can hit next. You enter your name, your email address, and a reason, and you hit save and submit, and that will get submitted to us for analysis to decide whether or not that makes sense for us to use as part of the new training and be able to retrain the model on something that we misclassified. So there is the idea here is that classifying and training loop will happen frequently. There is an automatic update procedure that's part of LogVisor, so it will download new models as they become available. You can turn that off if you don't have internet access or you're in a secure environment where that's not allowed, so you don't have to have that. But the idea here is the more modern or the more updated the model, the better results that are going to be. So we'll be constantly improving the model over time. So one of the other things you can do with LogVisor is also click a few logins or go back to the view, I'm sorry, and at any point you can export the log data back as syslog data, as text, CSV, HTML, or even LaTeX if you wanted to view specific search queries and things like that. So we got a couple of questions here. So one, does LogVisor AI work in an air-gapped environment? Yes. So there is nothing cloud-based about LogVisor other than getting updates. So you can, like as I mentioned, you can download the update separately if you want to do it in an air-gapped environment or stay with the model version you have, but everything is running locally. We are not sending any of your log data to the cloud unless you explicitly checked on an item and said, send to us to reclassify. So it is purely local-based. So it should work fine in an air-gapped environment. All right. So the next thing I wanted to highlight real quick, I know we're maybe running a bit over time, but appreciate everyone's patience here. So is the upgrade tool. So before, the story for upgrading ClusterVisor to a new version was kind of a pain because there's RPMs that install on your head node, your compute nodes, and multiple different places. So now there's an upgrade tool. So the upgrade tool, I'm just going to give it a quick demo. There's a web UI. Again, there's a command line version. You go to software upgrade. You hit this check for upgrade buttons. What it will do is it'll reach out to our Yum repository to see if there's a newer version available, and then it will go out and check your ClusterVisor server, as well as all of your nodes, as well as all of your images, your cloner images that are deployed to nodes, to see what versions they have. So it'll take a second, depending on how many nodes and things like that, but then it will give you this report on what's running on which machine. So you can see in our scenario, everything's already latest and up to date, but if it's not, there's a button here that you can click and it will actually proactively upgrade things in the right order and get your whole system up to date. So in the future, when doing updates to ClusterVisor, there's even an alert that will show up to tell you there's a new version of ClusterVisor available if you have internet access on your system. And then you can go in here, click the button, upgrade the whole thing. So it should be a much less painful process than in previous versions. Now, let's see. So other changes that we went through, this is kind of the main stuff. There's a CV alerts command line tool has been changed. The licensing system has been changed with automatic alerts. So when your license is about to expire, it will tell you. The system D units have all been changed a little bit, so they behave more appropriately. Lots of bug fixes to the stat queries. We added a storage role to CV image, so when generating images to install on nodes, we now have a new role called storage that's more appropriate for that. The DHCP DNS plugin before only worked with very basic settings. Now you have full control over your DHCP and DNS server that's running as part of your cluster, so you can create arbitrary records and tons of bug fixes and enhancement across the web UI, command line tools, and everything else. So if you're ready to upgrade, so what does that look like? So I had a couple of questions about this, so hopefully this answers all of them. So if you're at version 1.23.x, so the only gotcha to the upgrade is there's a new license file format for the 1.24 release. So everyone that has ClusterVisor now can have is licensed and is available to get the new release. You'll just need a new license file. So whenever you're ready to upgrade, contact us. We'll send you a new license file. You'll be good to go. So there isn't an additional cost or anything like that. It's just the format of the files have changed to add all the features we wanted. So once you've done that, put the new license file in place. All you need to do is on your appliance or your head node, run DNF upgrade ClusterVisor. Then you can hit the ClusterVisor web UI or the command line tool of CV upgrade, and it will upgrade all the nodes in your cluster to that version. If you're on an older version, the 0.5 release, there is a data migration that needs to happen to the 1.0 release. So that is more of a manual process. We will happily assist you at no cost to getting you to that version. So just contact us and we can work with you on how to get there. The only gotcha and all of the upgrades is if you were using diskless nodes. We have a few customers that were doing diskless in the 0.5 release. That has changed and moved completely to this new stateless system, which is much better. So there is a manual process there that needs to be done. So if you're one of those customers and you do want to upgrade, let us know. We'll work with you in getting all of that done for you. So there was a question about when do I get this? So we'll be publishing the RPMs later today. So we also do have a mailing list. So it's a really low traffic mailing list. It's only announcements about new versions. This is the URL. Again, you'll be able to get this afterwards, but you can sign up. We send out an email whenever a new release is published. We'll have a change log in there, that kind of a thing. So highly recommend you go out and get that and sign up for that mailing list. So, but again, the new version will be sent out shortly after the webinar today. So, and then I think the last thing is if there's any additional questions. So let me see, I have a couple. Can we gain access to the ClusterVisor user guide to get additional answers to questions? Yes, contact us and we'll send you some information about that. And then, can CV continue to be licensed if the hardware is out of warranty? Yes. So the warranty of hardware is independent of ClusterVisor. So as I think Wade mentioned in the beginning, we're even selling ClusterVisor now to non-advanced clustering hardware, so on those kinds of systems. So really the warranty of the system is independent of the warranty of ClusterVisor or the support of ClusterVisor. Okay, I think that is the last question I have. I know I went through a lot, and kind of quickly, and I'm a little over time, so I'm thinking we're going to end it now. But if you do have any follow-up questions, feel free to get in contact us. If you have more questions that are specific to your use case, we're happy to do a one-on-one kind of webinar. And keep an eye on your inbox. If we do new webinars, you'll certainly get notification. So again, thanks everybody for their time today. So, and I hope you have a great day.